Welcome to the Show Up Show, where we bring you everything you need to emerge as a powerful and healthy leader in your life, business, and relationships. Because how you show up in one area of life is how you show up in all of them. I'm your host, Debbie Pace, author of The Journal to Freedom, a foundational guide to help you examine your beliefs and how they shape your patterns and behaviors in life, so you can transform what's not working and can show up like a boss in every area of your life. On this week's episode of the Show Up Show, it really is an honor to talk with Dr. Alvarez-Holland, PT, also known as Lissette Alvarez-Holland, PT, who is really helping medicine women rising. She went from the lipstick patriarchy to staying home, baking cakes, and getting her curvy hustle on. And now she helps others do the same thing. Join me now as we dive into this very deep and much needed conversation.
My name is Dr. Alvarez-Holland, PT, and that's kind of like my brand name. My name is Lissette Alvarez-Holland, and I have been an integrative professional for now 25 years. It's kind of scary saying that, but basically what I did was I took mind-body medicine and I moved that into a very traditional rehab model. I specialized that then into women's niche. I started with the pregnancy year, took that into different transitions, and over the years, since I was this physical therapist doing things a different way, I naturally became a mentor as more and more people wanted to go into medpreneurship and looking at boutique practices and really filling in the gaps in the Western model, not only just because we were integrative, but because we were actually delivering the service a different way. So I naturally have moved in over the past couple of years into mentorship and helping people launch their own idea, moving their idea to some sort of income, flipping their pain and making it a little bit more of a passion and then hopefully a profit, so that we can really honestly, I focus on the women in that healer group, get the medicine women rising, because, you know, and that was before 2020, but definitely after 2020, we need that transition so that more and more people are really in their zone, especially in the healing world or teaching world or guiding mothers as well, you know, everybody who's in contact with the next generation.
So it's interesting that you talked about medpreneurs initially, and I'm not in the medical field. So to me, medpreneur would be someone who used to have a practice or maybe was a dentist or whatever. Is that typically what you mean when you say medpreneur?
Yeah, that's what I had started as. You know, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and I had been in integrative health and rehabilitation medicine, you know, for about 10 years before I jumped and started doing things on my own a little bit more, or changing the way things were done. I had been in orthopedics, and then I moved over to women's health. And at that time, there was only one way to do your practice, whether you're a counselor or this or that. And coaching wasn't even really popular, you know, back in 2005 or so. There were business coaches, but like health coaching wasn't on the rise and things like that. In terms of the yoga world, that was always coaching. But yeah, I like to walk the line between, I like to be in the mainstream so that I can help people bring in some of the other complementary things. And that has grown. I don't just help people who had licensures now, but I do tend to work with people who are changing that mind shift, you know, that mindset from being in the academic world. So maybe they have certifications and they've gone through, you know, some of those avenues, more than the random person off the road that, you know, had just their story and their life change and things like that. I'm trying to really get healthcare providers to start owning their transition into a more holistic care model. And if that means you have to leave Western rules, then I'm trying to give them a lot of support for that.
I love how you say Western rules, because it's not Western medicine. You know, as you were talking, I'm thinking, oh, she could have been talking to me a few years ago when I was really struggling with how do I move out of journalism and broadcasting, because that was a 30-year career for me. So when you talked about these, you know, I like to say like high achieving professionals, because that's typically who I work with as well. It's really shifting from the way the Western culture has been shaped of push, grind, struggle, hustle. And while there are obviously doing the work is important, but I think that there's this mindset of if you're not burned out, you're not doing it right. And so many people who come into probably your space as medical practitioners or whomever are dealing with that. Well, I'm already burned out. I don't want to create a new business now and still be burned out. And then also not be sure if I'm even going to make money doing it. So many people have to have, like, I know for me, the coaching was a side gig. It was like, I have to still do the burnout job while also trying not to completely burn out while doing, creating my own business, my own, whatever it might look like for each person. But then many of us have families, and then there's the whole human part. Like, how do I be a human in all of this and take care of my own needs? So the work that you do is so, so important. And I'm wondering, when people come into your sphere, what's the biggest area of resistance for them?
Well, there's two places, because, when you were talking about burnout in terms of healthcare, and I think, we're seeing this now across the board, obviously in economics and in corporate world and in education and, everywhere, even in spiritual development and going to church and everybody, it's not just the person helping on that side, who has the job, but also the people would be coming in burnt out. So you'd be hitting this resistance on both sides in terms of how much work is this going to do? Because again, like you said, the Western model is very much like, it's definitely going to be a lot of work, which is fine, but the issue was not being aligned with what you were doing. So the resistance I get from my peers when I'm helping them is almost the same resistance I get from when I was working with women, except it's who they're trying to impress. So the women at home asking for, a different balance of power is the same as somebody working in, healthcare still is a corporate world, so working in that balance of power and asking for my power, and also appreciating my own power and seeing myself differently than just the credentials after my name. It's kind of like, that's why I naturally went into brand development and business development in terms of getting them to get their message and their mission, because they're so boxed into, this is what an MD does. This is what a PT does. This is what an OT does. This is where I'm allowed to, talk. And just the biggest resistance for them is just understanding that just because you can treat and you have certain credentials or education doesn't mean you always need to be treating. You can be educating. You could be coaching and mentoring. And honestly, healthcare needs to go back to that. So it's getting them off of that, old paradigm where I'm the doctor and I'm the authoritarian, or I'm the therapist and I'm prescribing this thing to you.
Yeah. And something that you said a second ago was you called them peers. And I think that is such an important word to use, because even just in the coaching space in general, there's this unspoken almost hierarchy of, your level of importance is equal to your money, or how long you've been in the game, or how many coaching clients you've had and whatever. And I love how you make that distinction between the old model and the new just by using the word my peers. And, to go a little bit further, you were saying about how just because you are doing this practice doesn't mean that you can't be educating. And I think the other piece to that too is that just because you've gone through and gotten the education and been a practitioner for 20 years doesn't mean that you're stuck there. It doesn't mean that that's where you have to be, just because, and many people still maybe have debt that they're carrying from the stuff that the education and stuff. But it goes exactly to the point that you said, where if you are in the wrong lane, so healing and helping is innate. It's part of who you came here as, but it doesn't mean that it has to look like the Western model. It means it can evolve and change and transform just like we do as humans throughout our lives. And I love how you encapsulate that so completely. So how do people transform in working with you? What does the transformation process look like? Like, what's their end game?
Well, I think when they come to me, they're just looking for a different way to live their life. Like, that's why I did my own business. I didn't do my business so that I can be, with a Ferrari and a this and a that. That's great if I get it. But my main impetus was, how can I be taking care of my kids the way I would like to, as well as not be sacrificing my career, which I think is a different conversation, whether you're a man or a woman. I'm hoping that will change, but it's very true to, I didn't want to sacrifice. And they're and many of the times these women that I'm helping are in that same place where they know their value. It's not a nature of I'm taking them through them feeling unworthy or whatever. They just are saying, how can I have less under earning, more under, less undervalue? And the transformation is finding their value, going back into themselves, realizing their skills through their whole life, and then repackaging what they have, and not necessarily having to stay in that box, but literally seeing that as a piece of the puzzle. That's the transformation.
So it sounds like it's sort of an identity shift from what I provide equals my value to really who I am. And do you find that people who come into your space learn about themselves maybe in a way of, oh, I never realized that I loved painting? Or do you find that going from that really tight, very left-brained model of logic and thinking, that when they start to let go of that bit by bit, they start to embrace the more artistic aspects and the creativity that really helps them with that connection of who they are with who they are?
Yes, definitely. The move is really going from that competitor mind to the creative mind. But I think that's what, spiritual development or personal development, that's kind of part of the package. It's just that when you are the scientist your whole life, you're not necessarily reared that way to be thinking that that has a value, right? You're not necessarily thinking that's what's going to, quote unquote, pay the bills. But then you also start feeling joy in the way things are. Maybe it's to have holding that power over people or something like that. Whereas in creativity, there really is a vulnerability that a lot of smart people, intelligent people are not comfortable in. And a lot of, type A overachievers that get their way by manipulating the system, they don't feel as comfortable being part of that system, being part of that and actually having somebody else control where things are going, where the path is going. So, that is definitely something that we have to work through. That creativity is actually a really hot commodity. It's sexy. It's cool. Just like, whatever else you thought that other thing was going to give you.
And isn't it interesting how it seems our education system is a bit backwards on this, where the focus is on, like STEM and technology and all this stuff in our schools. And at least some, not, some schools obviously are very different, but I would say the school system I was brought up in was definitely very, very thinking centric and not really a lot of focus on the arts. And we saw a lot of things get removed. And yet the thing that will liberate us as a society is the arts.
Yeah. I have a little different take on that. I feel like there was this pocket of people, and maybe it was just the school district I was in, but everything around me, like it wasn't just my school district, but in the general area. And I lived in the downstate of New York. And I think it was just the times. I went to elementary school and middle school and high school during the 70s and the 80s. I was born in 72. And there was this pocket of time where it was post-Hitler and post-World Wars, and there was some peace, and people didn't want to go back there. So they actually got the tech going. And by the time I got into school, right, I'm born in 72, we had just gone to the moon, just had all this like NASA, whatever. I was taught to like explore and kind of like welcome sci-fi and, Ray Bradbury books and Orwellian books and think through things. And then I have a younger brother who's 11 years younger. And it seemed like through that time, like I didn't get introduced to a computer and data mining until 6th or 7th grade. He had it in kindergarten playing with the mouse, but by the time he went to those classes, I saw that shift of what you're talking about. But I feel like there was this little pocket of Generation X that actually was taught to be learners. And what you're describing to me sounds like, it's this big thing about we teach people to be educated, but not necessarily learners. I do believe that I was taught to be a learner, but I believe it was this little pocket. And as soon as Google came around and, all these other things in the 90s, everyone else was just sort of looking for somebody else's facts. And then, whoever was the most popular one, that's the way we go. That's the real life. And then that whole looking around disappeared.
It's more, what my point was more, we're taught to be educated and not creative. So I think that you're a learner through any process. And I also think that it's funny that you say you grew up, you said downstate New York. Okay, so my husband was from upstate New York and raised and I think that there's so many socioeconomic things that come into play here too. So his father was a child. Actually, I think his father was an immigrant. He moved here when he was 11. And so there's such a different mentality of do the things that bring you the money because you have the opportunities I didn't. And I think that that's, we're talking about generational stuff now. Now you're talking about Akashic record and Reiki, and you're talking about all this unseen stuff that is still so very present in our lives. But I think that it's really cool though, how despite let's just call it like the overarching theme of education at the time, there were always pockets, there were always outliers, just like in entrepreneurship, there's always these outliers, these people who, no matter what the status quo is at the time, they're busting out the seams and they're looking for new and different ways to do things because there always have been and always will be people who don't fit into there's square pegs in a round hole or round pegs in a square, whatever it is. I always get that messed up, but you know what I mean? I mean, it's basically like they don't fit in, and because they don't, they tend to be the people who make that massive change or create those movements for shift.
I almost feel like we're all born with that potential because, again, being a physical therapist, if I were to say how we develop from zero to, or even in utero, there's so much research now that in utero and even our mom's, health and things like that influencing how we're approaching things. We are born a learner. Like, I think learning does come out of creativity. I don't think education makes you a learner. I think you can have a lot of data and information, but if you're just regurgitating it out, I think you get good grades. But I don't think you know how to learn, because I see people who don't know how to have a conversation. They just debate and they fight. And I don't think that's necessary. I can think there's a lot of educated people. So I would say we're almost always learners because that's how we would never develop. Like when a child is blind or born deaf, they don't have any mental retardation necessarily, but they end up having some because they cannot interact with the world the same way, and it starts influencing how they move and where their motivation is, and obviously they need to start being more of a follower. And I think it's more of like you said, like an immigrant mentality, maybe because it wasn't as free to explore in their psyche, they're giving that route, or they worked so hard. And there was, again, we're talking about times, there was such a big promise about America. I think that's really changing. So we're at a precipice right now where we can really appreciate it's a whole new world. It really is a new game at this point, and hopefully we'll learn. And, people working with me in the health and medical field, or even teachers I have working with me, or moms that want to take their story of working essential oils or something like that to their own care. I hope they start owning that they can have a voice. Of course, we have to not be unsafe. But that's just a matter of knowing, who you are in the conversation. And that to me it's almost like what you never lost versus you're just born that way in my mind. Because I don't see too many kids who will refuse to explore.
Let's talk about change. It's obviously the theme of this conversation. The Show Up Show really does have a focus on overcoming obstacles. And I really want to understand from your perspective, you go from the Western medicine to basically coaching and teaching and medicine woman. That's a big stretch. That's a big stretch to the Western mind. And so can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of things you've had to personally overcome in your own transition? Because I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that there could be moments where maybe you have seen some resistance from your own community on this.
Well, yeah. I mean, we often end up, right, walking the walk and then talking that walk when that's part of our, story and share in terms of passing on the legacy. And so, yes, like I, again, being brought up at the time I was very much pushed into this like whole masculine model and to fit in the world. And that's how I could achieve. The door was opened up for us through the feminist movements, second wave feminism and things like that. But it was to join our game, the game already being played. And then, I go and have a baby and then I go and have a second baby. And all of a sudden I'm like, what is this? I don't want to do this work like that. I do want to stay home. Like I was just surprised because I was like, who is this type A independent woman wanting to like be supported by her husband and bake cakes, like we get this surge of
bake cakes.
Like I was like, who is this? So it's, I always was the creative person or whatever, but I think motherhood and things like that are natural transitions in our roles that come naturally to us, or maybe not naturally, which is what was my problem. I was not really, that wasn't as natural as me going and getting that next degree and going into the workforce and playing that game. It was really hard for me. And I realized that I was kind of misogynistic. Like I was brought up to play that game, but the reality was I was sitting there judging these women who just went to college and then were going to stay home with their kids. I can't believe it. How could you do that? And that was it was me being conditioned by, I can play, I call it the high heel or lipstick patriarchy. I was playing the lipstick patriarchy great, and it sounded like an independent woman. So my walk through that, regaining my feminine, got me obviously moving into women's health and seeing that injustice. And that, of course, got me into sort of a softer, curvier hustle, I call it, because I see the hustle as a dance. I just don't think we look at hustle in that way, but I think we need to turn it into that, prettier view of things, softer side, working with our rhythms and cycles and, the dance of the hustle and learning those steps in life. And then just accepting we're going to have curves. We're going to have tangents. It doesn't mean you're off your mark. It doesn't mean you have to start all over, which is what that linear grind was sort of teaching us. So that walk naturally, obviously it's resisted in my community because most of the people are type A's and most of the people got someplace the other way, but it's just a society thing. It's not because it's just, that's the way healthcare is or academics is. It's just society is not comfortable thinking that you can be creative and be successful, or to alignment and be intuitive, or some of these other traits that I think women have lost in themselves, even just going on the pill and doing these other things we thought were liberated. We actually gave up a lot of our power. So if anything, that's what's resisted, sort of combining the masculine and the feminine into whatever your blend you're going to be, and getting comfortable with that. Because honestly, even the conscious men who follow me and work with me or might approach me, they don't have any place to go. We haven't created a place in society for them to be like, you know what, I'm going to grow up, go to college, and then I'm going to decide to be a stay-at-home dad. Like that looks like, whoa, like.
That's a great point. I think I had a conversation a few weeks ago about this very thing, which is we as the females in a society, or even the feminine in a society, want our men to understand us more and become a little bit softer around the edges so that we can have this really open, conscious, and successful communication together. But yet we don't have a place where men can go. Like, we don't create that space for them as a general rule for what to do with these emotions. Like, open up, talk to me, share with me what you feel. And then they do. And we're like, oh,
what does that mean? You're going to quit your job and we're going to be without the house or whatever. Like, we kind of sit there like, what? And that's my point. Like, we've had like, we're going into the fourth phase of feminism now. Like, they haven't had that same alignment. And so we do. I mean, even I had my podcast, Owning Her Health, and I realized where there's a second conversation here. And I started the Evolving Human show recently in the summer, end of the summer, because I realized there's this other conversation that for us to get to the next level, for us to really have this sort of neutrality, and I don't even say it's equality. I just want everybody coming with what their juiciness is and just like blending it together. And I don't think everybody should be equal, because again, you lose that creative factor, right? Because then all we're doing is being competitive again. Like, I've got the blue shoes, you've got the blue shoes. Okay, who's the better blue shoes? I think we need to, move into understanding that it's going to be a mix, but we'll see. I mean, again, if I think that there's a certain population of women who will lead the charge in showing that blend, I really do believe it's Generation X women, because we do have that masculine and the feminine. Like, we can literally show men how to be softer, but not lose their man card.
Right. And that's the key. Is like, especially if there's men listening. I know there are some men in my community as well. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, they have grown up in a generation where showing emotion is weakness. And that's the biggest story. I know, my husband and I, we have conversations all the time, and, he's like, I'm not weak. I don't want to turn into some weakling or whatever. And it's like, well, it's not weak. Do you know how much stronger a man has to be to show that emotion? The weak one, and I know, weak versus strong, whatever, but, a person who is not brave and courageous will not show those emotions. But it takes that element of bravery and courage to open up, to be vulnerable, to be willing to be exposed to your partner, the one person who could possibly hurt you the most emotionally. And I think that if we can just shift that, like, no, bravery looks like this in our relationship. It looks like you showing up fully in every single way as you. And that means the messy, the ugly, the whatever, and not just coming here to be the knight in shining armor and fix the things that I may say are not quite right in my world, because doing all the fixing, then like a mechanic, your car is the one that ends up being the junkiest car on the lot. And I think that if we can just shift that mentality and shift that perception, we can really absolutely make so much headroom in this area.
Definitely, because we can start showing up, like you said, showing up with who we are, with our human capital, as opposed to the boxes or, whether it be names in this. And again, bring ourselves, I'm not saying don't be, some of the pushback that I'll get is like, professional level versus an amateur level of conversation, or, I don't want to be seen as, unprofessional or ignorant in some way. And the point of the matter is, bringing the heart back with the head so that we actually see the value in that, as a society, so that we actually care how we're making our money and how we're charging people and how we're building things. Certain companies came into play because they were able to make things very fancy, but it was still super cheap. It's still going to break, but it was supposed to look a nice way. And I think we're moving out of the phase of maybe that, it's not just toxic masculine, toxic. I kind of hate those things. It's more of like these energies where it's like more yin and yang and like higher on and soft and lower on, and realizing like, hey, everybody's got to go to sleep at night. Like that is when you should have enough of that power that you can turn yourself down enough to shift into rest and digest. It could be just, in my healthcare practice, that was kind of where I worked. And this is just a bigger expansion of it. It's just the microcosm and the macrocosm. So when you say that was a really big shift, to me, it wasn't, because I think women were always supposed to be this model of the other way to go when things get tough, so that you don't break, you can bend, you don't bend, you don't go shoot somebody because you're having a bad day. Like there's ways to do it. I just don't think historically we were looked at other than our function, because we were looked at that way by people who took power, who really only saw that as a functional thing, because looking at us in that whole emotional and whatever, that was very scary to look in the mirror and see that in yourself.
Boy, this conversation got deep fast. Yeah, me too. And boy, that's just such an awesome equation to go deep fast. And what's interesting too is that these conversations are so needed, and while it might not be your own personal example necessarily of, I had doctors giving me a hard time, or I had people, no longer referring people to me, or I had a difficult time continuing my practice with whatever. But I think the more important piece here is the impact that it had. And I do a lot of work around ego, like heart versus ego. And so when we're talking about the resistance, I'm looking at it, and the first thing that hit me was the ego resistance to the shift. Because even though, like you just said, it's not like you necessarily were doing anything different. It's all the same principles. But yet to the mind, it's like, oh, but you gave up all your significance, sister. Look at you now over here doing this medicine woo-woo, and that, because that's the stuff I heard too. And it's so interesting because it sometimes can make it more difficult for us to really clarify and articulate our path, and then maybe draw in the clients and the people who really need us. Because when we're not clear, when we're allowing all these other messages, these external messages, to determine how we look at and feel about our new path, right? About a new vehicle to our path, the same path that we've likely always been on, or at least always felt we were, we belonged on. To really have that shift like that, I think is something that I would love for you to touch on.
To what extent, in terms of how I did that shift, or just what I'm looking at?
Yeah, so either how you did that shift, or even how you see other people making that shift, because sometimes it's easier to see it on the outside. So, I mean, either one, we'll take either.
Well, I think, initially it was that just people were breaking down. So again, when I was talking about the bend versus the break, they didn't really know how to bend. And of course, it's like, go to yoga. That was the whole past 10 years. Go to yoga, mind, body, be meditating, so that you bend, don't break. And so, that was my in to some extent. But then I saw the resistance is what level they'll allow themselves to. My job is holding up a mirror. I'm not fixing anybody. I was told, I was trained to go fix people, but I realized soon that this was a partnership, and how do I play this game like that? And I had to go off on my own, honestly, because it really wasn't allowed then. And it's just when you're holding up the mirror, to have people not necessarily blame you for it, So what I see is the shift of people slowly moving from understanding that I'm holding a mirror and what they're seeing is not me, it's them.
Yes.
And getting a little more comfortable understanding that, self accountability, because you can't have self agency. You can't have this self-esteem we talk about if you cannot see the self. And so, a lot of times people are like, oh, when you're saying woo woo or whatever, I'm saying, look, spirituality to me is a study of self, is a deep, deep study of self. So like, when you're like, here I am, this is what I want to be. If you don't know yourself, that's kind of where I see the shift happening. And I don't know if it's, I think I saw, again, the whole Me Too movement, and this is me. And, then we're getting into, and probably even beforehand, people feeling more comfortable having a disability or a physical, attribute that's not like everyone else. We've slowly seen this, the I amness. I think what we have now is this kind of like upper brain, upper mind, lower mind, like you were talking about. I kind of see the ego as sort of protecting that lower mind. And when you have that higher mind of reasoning and perception more developed, it makes it a lot harder for the lower mind to sort of just grab ideas and make you react and do these things. And I see, that's the resistance. So getting people to be open to, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. This is not like instant gratification, total comfort. That's been my biggest path, is trying to keep molding and keep evolving so that I can, I'm not going to give you a pill because there is none, but can I make it sweet enough that you will be a little uncomfortable for it?
How has your own journey helped in that? Usually we can't take people to places that we haven't been, and we can't necessarily take them any deeper than we've been. So how does your own personal experience help with that aspect of it?
Well, it was had my own history, like everybody does, getting me to about 2016. But then I decided, you know what? I was the first medicine woman. I'm a modern day medicine woman. I'm a mystic. I'm like, whatever. I don't know how you get, I guess I'll write and I'll do things, but I'm like a modern day wise woman. That's what I want to be now, not that I know everything, but I just want to have great conversations with great people and evolve the human, consciousness.
Yes.
And I kind of saw it as, I don't want to necessarily just be teaching yoga classes on the mat. I want to kind of take yoga into life a little bit more, because that's how I worked with people. And so as I did that, unfortunately, my own, in talking about the masculine and feminine and kind of roles and this and that, my own marriage ended up being kind of my training ground to where I am even now. Because over those years, within a year of me sort of seeing things in a different, elevating myself, you end up with whoever's around you. And, maybe some of the listeners can understand or not understand this. There is this uncomfortable point where you're like, okay, who here's coming with me? And who here's not.
Yes.
And for me, I had to kind of go through that, because I had created so beautifully, right, through my 30s, this ideal world, this ideal Truman show that I lived in. And,
yes, I use that example all the time.
Yeah.
The Truman
show. And my world was changing. And it came to be who wants to come with me and who doesn't. And I made the decision, I'm not staying in this world. And that had to be my decision. And of course, I needed to kind of get to that point where I had been a partnership up until that, even with my friends. But you start seeing these people sort of vibrate away, and you really have to be at a place where you're like, it is me, but it's not me, it's not my problem. It is me. I don't feel so good for them anymore. I know what I'm doing. And then, so I did have to sort of really, I knew that theoretically, I knew it, I had seen pieces of it, but I had not really literally gone to where I lost like everything. I mean, I'm on the total redo, but that old life would have never gotten to me where I was going,
Right.
So at some point you do have to decide to walk, Lao Tzu's, the way, where you're willing to say, is this something that you're willing to let all that go for if it can't come with you? Not that it has to go, but you will definitely see who your friends were, who your, who the people were there for the good and the bad and really are there for where they are. Because that's the thing, my ex isn't a bad person. He's just not ready to go where I'm going to need somebody to be if they're that close to me,
Right.
as
Yeah.
I'm doing work. So I think I needed to kind of go through that so that I could go even deeper. Like I was bringing people through a transformation, but to even go even more to where I think they're going to actually be, I'm teaching the teachers now,
Mm-hmm.
So those teachers will need to have mastered some harder stuff.
Yes.
And so,
yes, exactly.
That's definitely influenced me as I've just gone up a notch.
And there's probably going to be another notch that you'll have to go up through for the next phase and the next phase. Yeah. So I love that you said that. And it's so funny because the Truman Show was such an example, a model in my own life. And I had a situation where I moved out of my home state and whole family, and we moved back. We went back to visit. And there was this moment where I was having a conversation with my husband, and all of a sudden, the entire reality of what I had created with my own little Truman Show was so clear. And the most important piece of that was really in breaking it all down and understanding that the actors in my little movie were filling a role. I had propped them up in my life to fit a piece, so I didn't feel unworthy, or I didn't feel broken, or, something that made me feel less than whole. Each person filled this little gap all along the way. And when we went back for this visit this time, everything shifted. And then some friendships fell away. But the really cool aspect of that, because it sounds like, oh my God, like, what did you do? But the really cool piece of that was once that happened, my family members no longer filled a role. So it was no longer a conditional type of love with them. It was really me coming from a place of, I just love you, and I love you no matter how you behave with me, or no matter how you respond to me, or no matter how you show up for me, or even your own life. And really having that level of love and acceptance when you let go of that model, let go of that role that a person has to play in your life, is just beautiful. I'm guessing you probably saw that even in your marriage, where you're letting it go and you get to this point where you're like, okay, you're no longer, I don't need you to fill this role, and not sure where he is, but we don't need each other to fill this role anymore. But boy, can we sure still move forward and be great.
Right. I mean, I think also too, I don't want to make it sound like you end up alone. It just is a lonely path from where you were, but like, that's your choice too. Like, because it's like creates a vacuum. And so what you're now attracting is what you need.
Exactly.
As opposed to nursing what you no longer need, but feel so fearful that, you're going to be naked and exposed in a way that you're not ready for. But like you said, there's that freeing moment. And it was even, I mean, and I had, again, been seeing this, you see this through different phases, your high school friends versus your college friends, and your college friends versus like when you were first working and before you had kids and after you had kids. And it's all an evolution. And that's really, the other alternative was just not appealing to me, to stay where I was and be satisfied there, because I wasn't. There's always this other vision, and I wanted this part in my life, and I got exactly what, and if anything, it's very empowering.
The thing that's coming to me right now is, I'm sure there are people listening to this show right now who are saying, they're feeling like this pull. They're feeling this something in their side that is not quite right. what would you briefly say to let them know that this is probably a path that they want to consider? Like, how would they know that, yeah, you know what, this is definitely some of the work I need to do? How do they know that?
I think that if you wake up every day, or if you're reminded every day of it, like if you find yourself wanting to paint every day, or like for me, like I know I need to publish a lot of my writing. Like that's going to be my next step, because I went into writing and I was just like literally from like making this transition. All of a sudden I started waking up in the morning and I would just write. And then I realized actually in 2020, I think I might be channeling. Like, I think it's just coming to me. This isn't actually me. I just wake up and I'm almost like a vehicle and I write this stuff down. And I need to really organize this and channel it into a couple books, or, get those blogs and consistency of whatever this is, because it's a message. Like I can't not do that. Like when there's something you find yourself, just caring about, or finding a need to share, like you learn something and I think it's that point of going from the place of this is for me, and I think we're all there. Like, I'm going to go get this job so that I can have this house, or I can have this car, or I can have this family, and I can live in this town, and I can go this place and have these clothes. And then all of a sudden it turns into like, I'm going to do this thing where I am right now. I'm going to rebuild this like different phase of the matriarch, which is not the crone and it's not the mother. It's like this middle place where you literally need to like grab your power, because I'm thinking of my grandchildren. I may never even see these people, and you, when you have something that you realize you're doing to leave legacy outside of like your comfort zone right now, I think that's just something, that's definitely calling you. Like, that's not who the hell would wake up in the morning and be like imagining this dream of like doing all this stuff and not seeing it through? Like, like you wouldn't have that dream if you're dreaming of that future, like where you start the ball rolling and hope you can leave something that keeps on going for the betterment of more people than you and your own little like circle. I think that's it. I think when you see something like that, like you want to create a painting because you want people to see what you saw, or you take a picture because you just, that moment, you wanted to share it. And I think people do that on social media.
Yeah.
Like they're wanting to share their moment. But if you're doing it like, I want you to think the way I am, then that's probably just you being egoic.
Right.
A very small self, right? We don't want to condemn the self. It gets you out of bed in the morning, but very small. You're trying to still make everybody go into that wonderful Truman Show and fit it.
Yeah. And we all know that doesn't work in the long run. So I'm sorry, spoiler alert. No.
If you were going down that path, just have fun, because it's not going to last.
Exactly. Well, this has been such an amazing conversation with you. And it's so obvious we could talk all day and still not even hit the surface of the level that we probably are capable of getting to. So for those who are interested and this does resonate with them, how do they get in touch with you? What's the first step for them in your community?
Yeah, I think the best place to go in terms of if you're somebody sort of moving from that career minded to a calling, you think you might be one of us, that's just something still speaking to you, going on over to www.drlisahollandpt.com. That's where I have some of the work I'm doing with if you think you're a healer in the making, or have some guide or teaching objective to keep it sane and help you transition, or just think that through, that's probably the best place to contact me. And what you can do is sign up for a consult there, and we can have a chat and see where you're at. And then I can direct you towards maybe some of my circles, or even my peers, other wonderful women like Debbie and things like that are out there.
That's excellent. And one thing I'll add to that, because you had said, if you think you may be a healer, I would add, if you're always attracted to the healers, because I know in my own experience, I was always around them, but never saw myself as that, because no one reflected that mirror to me. They hadn't reflected that mirror to me yet. And so because of the beautiful work that you do, I'm going to guess that there are people who are going to listen to this and who do belong working with you and in your community, who just find themselves drawn to you and drawn to all these other healers, and they don't understand why, to really take a look at that
Right. You might have been put in a box beforehand and not really realize you're one of them. Right. Thank you so much. That's very true. So if you are attracted to that, definitely reach out.
Well, it has been my absolute honor to have you on the show today, and I'm looking forward to supporting you and having as many people as we can continue to rise up and into their true being. So thank you so much for being on the Show Up Show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love it. Love the work you're doing. Thanks.
If you like what you're hearing on the Show Up Show, be sure to subscribe. And if you really, really, really like it, please leave a 5-star review. If you'd like to connect with the Show Up Show on social media, you can find us on Facebook at the Show Up Show Podcast or on Twitter at the Show Up Show. Let's be sure to connect over on the other side. Thanks for listening.